Alright, last video before we have class, and I actually decided to just revamp my Chipotle calorie calculator because I thought since you're already familiar with the functionality, it might be cool to see some improvements that I was able to make using methods and stuff like that. So I think, well, how about this? Let me open up the section 1 code just so you can remember how long it was. Blah 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 cannot be opened. What? Lies. 1050 section 1. Alright, so here was my version of the Chipotle calorie calculator before, and as you can see, it was all one file, bunch of variables, reading and writing, more variable stuff. So it's this big sprawling monolithic code. So now in section 2, example 4, I have recreated it with some improvements. So if you look at my main program now, you can see it's very small, which is what you want. So honestly, you can, even without looking at the rest of the code, I hope, you can kind of see what I've done here. So the very first line of code says, create an order. Well, without even looking into order right now, I'm going to go ahead and guess that the order has information about my order, like how many, whether I want chicken or carnitas or that type of thing. And here I can see, because now that we know what method invocation looks like on an object, we can clearly see that this is an object member method invocation, because this is an object of type order, and anytime you say object dot something with parentheses, that's the invocation of a method. So I'm asking my order object to gather the data from the user. Well, if you recall from the last implementation of this, we went through this whole phase of, hey, what do you want on your burrito? Do you want this? How many of them? How many of those do you want? How many of those do you want? And I'm going to assume that this line of code, that method, is going to do that all for me. And then on the next line, well, also one more observation is that I'm going to say that that method is going to be void, because my order.gather data from user does not sound like a noun. It sounds like a pure verb. If I say, hey, go gather all the information you need from the user, I'm not expecting to get back a value from that. That's just saying go do something. Go figure out how many carnitas they want and how many chicken they want and yada yada, all that stuff. Just go forth and get it from them. However, this next line is also a method invocation on my order, but this one, as you can see, is being used as a value. Value on the right being put into the variable on the left. So this guy is saying, hey, order, now that you have all the information you need from the user, what's the total calories? So I'm invoking two methods on my object, the order. I'm saying first get everything you need to know from the user, and then do whatever you need to do to figure out what the total calories of the meal is. Give it back to me. I'm going to store it in this little variable here. And actually the only place I'm using that variable is right there. So I could probably just get rid of that and put that right there. Just get rid of that line completely. It's even better. So it's kind of beautiful. I just create an order object. I tell it to gather the data from the user, and then it seems that my order already has, it knows my first name, it knows my last name, and it can compute how many calories my order is. Well, that's pretty magical. So obviously in order for us to understand how that's happening, I need to go into this class and look at the details. So I'm going to, there's a number of ways to do that. You can, I think, hit F12, or you can just go over here and click on it, or if all else fails, right click on the class and say go to definition. So here's the order class. And now this should start to make sense, because we can see every order has a first name, every order has a last name, every order has a number of tortillas, every order has a number of carnitas, every order has a number of taco shells, every order has a number of how many orders flavors of rice you want, and so on and so forth. So inside of every order object, I can create more than one order object. I just chose to create one in this example. But every order object I create will have this information in it, how many of each ingredients I want. So this is the nouns of the order. This is the stuff that's inside an order object. So now we get to our first method, the one that's void, like I guessed from looking at it. It's not giving us a value, but it's doing a bunch of stuff. It's going through that whole process of reading in values from the user. It's saying, hey, what's your first name? Stores it. Hey, what's your last name? Stores it. How many orders of chicken do you want? Stores it. So there's two things to note here. The first, the obvious one, is that where these values are being stored to, this.first name, this.last name, this.chicken, they're being stored right here. So the nouns of the object itself are being, their values are being obtained from this method. So I create my object here. It has variables for all of these pieces of information, but no values. When I invoke this method, it will then go and start asking the user for values and putting values into these variables. And you can see that here because all of the variables on the left side of the assignment operator say this dot and have the same variable names as these. So essentially, by asking an order object to gather data from the user, it's what we call hydrating itself with information. It's filling its own variables up with values. The second thing, which is more complicated, that you should have noticed is I'm not doing console readline and writeline over here. And the reason is because I hate doing console readline and writeline. So what I did was I made myself some helper methods. I created myself this question class, and actually really quick before I do that even, if you go back here, remember what I told you before. Anytime you see a class name followed by a dot, that means you're looking for statics, because that means you're starting at the class and looking on the class, right? So something like this where you're looking at an object, that's on an instance object. When you start with a class, you're looking for statics. So ask for string is a static method on the question class. So I don't need you to understand the gory details of some of this, because this is most like a convenience method that I just wrote to make this easier for myself. But in general, I wrote these three static methods: ask for string, ask for integer, ask for bool, which both perform both the console write and the console read, plus some formatting for me. We can talk about some of the particulars of this in class, and if you're curious, you can glance at it, but I don't really care if you do right now. The important thing is that these are static methods that are performing a combination of console write line and console read line. So actually this right here will print out to the screen, what's your first name, and it'll also at the same time then wait and read in the value that they type in and then return it back. So this method is void. It does not return a value, but it does go through all these instructions, and hence the order object that we ask to gather data from user will go through all these questions, read in all the values, and hydrate itself with all these values. So that's that one. So if you remember back in the main program, the first thing we did was we created the order object, and then we said, hey, gather the data from the user. So that was the very first thing we did. So we called this. So now after that, we should have an order object full of the answers from the user. So all of these values right here, all of these variables should have values. Next, the very next thing we did was we said, well, now I'm going to start, it printed out something and it used the two simple values, first name and last name. But this is what we care about here. In the middle of this printout, it said, okay, I'm going to concatenate some strings together, but one of the strings, I can't get it until this method computes. So when we get to this instruction here, it's going to say, oh, okay, here's a string, and I'm going to concatenate it with this string, and at that point it's going to say, oh, wait a minute, I know this is a string because my order is of type order, And if you look at order and you look at the get total calories method, oh, I'm sorry, it's an integer. You can see the return type is an integer. So if you go back to the main program, this is an integer because of the definition, the return type that is defined in the class on the method. So we know this is a number, but it's going to say, well, I know this is a number, but you have to wait. I have to go actually invoke the method, go through it, and get the return statement, and then I'll know the number, and then I'll come back, and then I will tell you what this number is. So if we go back in here and look into this method, get total calories, this is interesting. So I basically relocated my code that I had before into this nice convenience method so that the order itself can use the values that it already has, right? Like the order already asked the user what all these values are. These are the quantities. So the object already has all these quantities inside of it because the object member variables are stateful. They never go away. They're always there. So once I read them all in here, they're there for good, unless I change them. So these are all there. I declared this temporary variable that I intend to be the ultimate total meal calories that I'm going to return. All I have to do is keep updating it according to multiplying my quantities times the actual calories of each particular item. Now if you remember, we had these as constants, just a big list of constant variables at the top of the main program last time. So this time, well, there we have it again, a class followed by a dot, which means static. So as always, we follow the class, go to definition. So here's my calories class. I put all my consts in here. And notice my little comment here. Const is the same as static, except you cannot change the value. So when you put, I mean, it's the same concept. As I said before, if you have 17 instances of a class and they all have the same value all the time, why would you ever not want it to be static? It wouldn't make any sense. Like for example, if you had a person class and there's 1,000 instances, you wouldn't want a variable called species because all people have the same exact species, no matter what. So in this case, const is the same thing. Const means it has a value that never changes, so it's pointless to have every instance have its own special piece of memory for the variable. So const behaves the same way as static, except it's more constrictive. It's constricted more because you cannot change the value. So const, static, pretty much the same thing, except static I would be able to change the values, don't want to. So when you see calories dot and then a variable name, it's either going to be a static or a const, basically the same thing. And that is kind of it, because down here it really, it uses, as I'm trying to compute this internal variable, the variable that it only exists in the method invocation, I'm using the object's member variables in combination with these static, or these constant calorie amounts to compute a summation of the total meal calories. And that is it. That's all of the code. And as we see it kind of unfold here, I'll just debug through it and then we'll be done. So I'll start here. First line of code. My order is not created yet because it didn't get instantiated. I'll hit F10. Now it gets instantiated. You can see that it is now an object. And if I open up, it's going to have quite a few things in it. Let's see if I can make this a little bigger. So you can see all the internal values in my order are all 0, right? My first name and my last name are both null, and all the food quantities are all 0. So what I'm going to do now is I'm sitting here on line 8, and I'm going to dive into the invocation of gather data from user. Oh crap, I accidentally hit F10. Do that again. Gotta hit F11 if you want to dive in. F10 creates an order. F11, there we go. Now I'm inside gather data from user. First line. So when I hit F10, it's going to execute my method that asks me for my name. and it's going to read it in. It's going to store that in first name. So if we go back to the locals window, we're going to see that at this point now my name has Donnie. And I think I'm going to go ahead and just, let's see what I can do here. I'm going to, where did my Solution Explorer go? View, Solution Explorer, go back to my order. Right, so I'm going to go ahead and hit, I'm going to put my breakpoint down here on 41, and I'm just going to let it rip. So I'm going to hit F5, which means I'm going to stop stepping through each one of these because it's going to take forever. But then when it gets to 41, it's going to stop again. So I'll hit F5. Now it's just going to go through this series of questions. Santos, how many orders of chicken? Let's go with my usual burrito, double chicken. Carne is not available. No steak, no barb. Beans, cheese, fajita, no, too many carbs. Nope, no, and no. Okay, so there's my burrito. So at this point, it's done reading in the quantities, and you can see I can hover over any one of these and it says what the quantities are. Or I go back to my locals and we can see all the values are read in now. So I have 2 chicken, 1 cheese, 1 beans, and this is my order. So this is all the information inside of my order object, which is good. It's exactly what I want. I'll close that. So where am I here? I think I'm right there. So it's basically done calling get data from user, and it started invoking that back here in program. So the next line of code should be line 10. So if I hit F10 from here, I should be done with that, and now I'm at line 10. And at this point, I have my order filled with the correct quantities that the user input. So that part's done. Now this part, this is just a simple write line with my order first name and last name, which is there already. So if I hit F10, that should be simple. Let's see, order details from me. Now at this point, like I said, it isn't going to be able to know this number until it dives in and does all that work. So I'm going to hit F11 to dive in. So it has now jumped over here to get total calories. So let's watch this in action. So I'm going to go ahead and expand that to make this a little bigger. Okay, so keep an eye on total meal calories right there, and keep an eye on how that works with the quantities. And you can see these things here are constants. Those are sitting there in that class like static variables. So I can hover over all of the actual calorie items and see what their values are. So those are known already. So as I go through these, it's going to use the quantities that are inside of this object, right? And this is kind of like the key concept. The my order object is an order object, and it has been asked to invoke this method get total calories. So at this point, I am the order object. That's why when I say this dot chicken, I get 2, because I'm a particular instance of an order, and I have my own values for all of the ingredient quantities, just like every person has their own values for their attributes. So I am an order, I have particular values for my quantities, and now I'm using those in conjunction with these static variables here. So now as you can see, the total meal calories one at a time based on the quantities times the calories, just updated because I have 1 beans times 120. And it should update again when I get to cheese, I believe. I have 1 cheese times 100, so there's another 100. It's going to return the total meal calories. Finally, it says, okay, now I'm back. I got the number you were looking for, and now I can print it out. And there it is, 600. So hopefully that gives you an idea of how you can debug through method invocations to figure out what's going on. mastering methods and using methods in object-oriented programming is essential to learning how to, what's the word, make your code really clean and maintainable and readable and easy to use for other people. Like you saw that mess that I wrote before, but now it's so easy. It's like anybody could open this and be like, oh, you get order, get the data from the user, and it can get the total calories. So you can kind of see just from the really small main program that most of the work is being done here. And like I showed you before, you can kind of collapse the method definitions to get a kind of a big picture of the class. So, this part of the method right here is called the signature, and this part is called the implementation. The implementation is like the how it does what it does, and the signature here is kind of like the what. So you should be able to get the gist of what the method's doing just from looking at the signature. Like get total calories that returns an integer is pretty obvious what it's supposed to do. This is just the how it's doing it. So if you want to get just an intuitive idea of what the whole class is doing, sometimes you can collapse those method definitions to get a better look. So you can actually even create a region. I usually don't do this, but you could say, what are these? These are order quantities or ingredient quantities. Then you can end the region. And then you can collapse that too, I think. Right? I don't usually do that, but, who knows? Maybe you'll like that. So, I guess that's it. It's pretty, using these methods to encapsulate that behavior and that logic. It's not just for, making your code clean and moving it out of the main program. It also makes it reusable. You never know when some other piece of code somewhere else is going to need to do the same thing. And in those cases, you have an object that can be instantiated and perform that for you as many times as you want without having to write the code again. And that will become more and more clear once we start writing more complicated programs. I'm sure we're going to talk about this in class. I might even write another program. So I'm going to go ahead and kill it at this point, and I'm going to go write your assignment. All right, I will see you guys in class.